Dan Geltrude and Company founder. Ann Berry is the Wheelhouse Chief Investment Officer. You know, one thing that's for sure, Dan, it touches exactly on what Ann was saying. For now, at least, and it could change, Ukraine seems to be dictating market sentiment. The better worrisome or talk of this escalating tensions there, the worse for stocks. I'm just wondering, will that continue to be, no matter how this works out, that for now, Ukraine, because it's sort of a linchpin when you make that inflationary argument, things could get worse if things get out of control. What do you make of what will drive stocks in the near term?
I think, Neil, that stocks are still going to be impacted by headlines, and certainly the big headlines right now is what's going on with Ukraine. But you know what's very interesting here, Neil, and you've said it many times, that the stock market is not red or blue, it's green. So in spite of the fact of whether Putin is a morally bad guy, an evil guy, the market looks at it and says, well, how does that affect money? And I think what's happening right now is the market, whether it's in the U.S. or in Russia, they're looking at this and saying, you know what? And things may not change all that much. So buyers coming back into the market for now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we got to get back to these guys are about green and making money. And maybe, and they have interpreted the actions taken thus far as not too cruelly disrupting the world. That might be a leap of faith, but we'll see. But I did want to get your take in on what the markets are hoping for as well, that the Federal Reserve, very clearly aware of this inflationary spiral, is equally aware of what tenterhooks the economy globally could be on if they go too far raising interest rates. So one of the reasons given for the run-up in the last couple of days is that the Federal Reserve will still hike interest rates to deal with inflation, but maybe not as much and maybe not as many. Do you believe that?
I think that's right. I think the pattern of behavior from the Fed, Neil, throughout the COVID crisis, and I suspect what we will see this year, is to try to be responsive to the data as it presents itself, rather than trying to predict too much what's going to happen when there is uncertainty. I think that there had been a market view that the Fed was going to raise rates here rapidly, multiple times this year, up to 9 to 11 times. I think the expectation is that will slow. I think, Neil, the other big piece of this here is that ultimately the impact of sanctions on Russia, the efficacy of that, is going to be highly dependent on what Europe does. It is Europe who is the biggest trading partner when it comes to natural resources with Russia. It is Europe that holds the keys to keeping Russia on or off the SWIFT payment system. And I think the market is looking a little bit and saying we need to understand what Europe's going to do. The US seems to have done as much as it can do from a sanction perspective. This is increasingly now a problem that needs to be resolved overseas. So I think it's partly the Fed, but I think it's partly the fact now that there needs to be a more global set of more stringent actions before we see another big set of moves in the market.
Thank you. Dan, real quickly, if despite the success of plainclothes Ukrainians taking matters into their own hands and trying to fight back against Vladimir Putin, he still has overwhelming over the country, does install a puppet government. How will the markets deal with that?
I think the markets will be fine with that, Neil. And the reason I say that is as we're watching things play out right now, Putin is not going after infrastructure to really disrupt what a post-Russia-Ukraine country will look at. So he's going to try to return things to normal. And again, the markets are about the money. So if things go back to normal with minimal disruption, in spite of what happens to the Ukrainian people, the market will return.
Final word on that, Dan. I want to thank you and thank you very much. Let's get